There is a famous love song with the memorable line, "Falling in love with love is falling for make-believe." Today's program is the third in a series I'm doing on love and what the great thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about love. Today's segment will focus in on many illusions the great thinkers claim we have about love and the unhappiness these illusions can cause us. But first, a brief review of last week's program. I spoke last week about love as a cause of both unhappiness and happiness. With regard to the former, Sigmund Freud said this, and I'm quoting him, "We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love." Perhaps an obvious example of this is the idea that when someone we love suffers, we also suffer. But of course, love can also be a cause of happiness. So many of the great thinkers have said that nothing gives life as much meaning as does love. And Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, put it this way. Jung said, "Love makes a person better. Hate makes that person worse." How so? How can love make a person better? Well, last week I spoke about many ways in which love can make us better, but in just briefly reviewing now, let me point out that it's been said that genuine love can help improve our intellectual and spiritual vision, that when we love, we see the world and other people more clearly, whereas hatred can blind us. Okay, let's talk now about some illusions perhaps most of us, if not all of us, have about love. Perhaps the leading illusion is that one can love others without loving oneself. And by loving oneself, I'm not talking about vanity. I'm not talking about conceit. When the great thinkers talk about self-love, they're talking about self-respect and the idea that to love oneself, one must have self-respect. The great German thinker Nietzsche addressed himself to this illusion. And Nietzsche said this, and I'm quoting him, Whoever is dissatisfied with himself is ready to revenge himself, and we others will be his victims." Perhaps the best illustration of the consequences of a lack of self-love is illustrated in the very famous play by Eugene O'Neill entitled Long Day's Journey into Night. As you probably know, it's been said that this play is largely autobiographical. In one of the most brutally honest moments in the history of the American theater, Jamie, a character in the play who plays Eugene O'Neill's older brother, is talking to his younger brother, again a surrogate for O'Neill, and he says this, "I'd like to see you become the greatest success in the world, but you'd better be on your guard, because I'll do my damnedest to make sure you fail. Can't help it. I hate myself. Got to take revenge on everybody, especially you." This raises some important questions, I think. Among them are the following. Do the happiness stealers among us tend to be people who have little self-respect? And can one have self-respect if one has little or no concern with treating other people fairly? It's also interesting that this segment of Long Day's Journey by Eugene O'Neill also, I think, illustrates the destructive effect of power trips in relationships. So many of the great thinkers have talked about such effects. Carl Jung claimed that where there is a power trip, there isn't any love. And Alfred Adler, the great psychiatrist, tried to explain the reason for power trips. And Adler said this, and I'm paraphrasing him now. Dr. Adler said that so often the reason people engage in power trips in their relationships with others is to compensate for their own feelings of inferiority. What I'd like to do now is to zero in on some specific allusions concerning romantic love. Romantic love. The Dalai Lama recently has addressed himself to this. And he points out that so much of what comes out of Hollywood and so much popular music creates a certain fantasy about love, and that this fantasy is unattainable. And since people can't attain it, it means they become frustrated in trying to attain it. Psychiatrist M. Scott Peck put it this way. Peck said that so often people desperately and futilely try to make the reality of their lives conform to the unreality of the love myth. An illustration, I think, of this comes from a classic movie by Ingmar Bergman. Perhaps you're familiar with it. It's entitled Scenes from a Marriage. It's about the breakup of a marriage between two very educated people. Marianne, in a particular scene, is thinking about love, and she's worried because she cannot make her feeling about love resemble what she thinks it ought to be. Again, some very specific illusions now concerning romantic love. The idea that lust is love. How many people mistake lust for love? Another illusion, that if I have a successful romantic love relationship, I'll no longer be lonely. Well, so many of the great thinkers address themselves to this, and so many of them have said there really is no cure-all for loneliness. Yes, there are things we can do to diminish our loneliness, but even in the best relationships, there will be some loneliness. And I think this is illustrated very well in a very famous book by D.H. Lawrence entitled Sons and Lovers. In a particular scene in this book, the recently married Mrs. Morell is lamenting the fact that her marriage seems to be going bad, and that she feels lonely, and that she feels even more lonely when she's with her husband. And D.H. Lawrence puts it this way, and again, this is a quote from this famous novel. She felt lonely with him now, and his presence only made it more intense. Thoreau, not a romantic, did address himself to the subject of loneliness. And Thoreau, like so many thinkers, believed that the best way to reduce one's loneliness in life is not to have a successful relationship, although that can be good, but rather to learn to enjoy one's own company. Again, that perhaps is the best way of reducing one's loneliness, learning to enjoy one's own company. Another common illusion concerning romantic love is that I'll completely know another person. I'll completely know another person. Writer Judith Viorst has said that in many marriages, people are, and I'm using her phrase now, intimate strangers. And Albert Schweitzer, the great humanitarian, doctor, professor, Albert Schweitzer, in his writings, said that we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that we are each a secret to the other. Dr. Schweitzer said that we can live with someone for years and not really know that person. He said this. He said that when it comes to what constitutes our inner life, when we're talking about what constitutes our inner life, we can only impart small fragments to others. Dostoevsky, in The Brothers Karamazov, has a character say this: why is it we can never know everything about another person? And Charles Dickens, in A Tale of Two Cities, wrote this: every human being is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other human being. Another illusion: love just happens. You don't have to work at it. Well, several times in my previous segments on love, I've mentioned the classic book on love, at least in my opinion it's a classic book, called The Art of Loving by psychoanalyst Erich Fromm. And Fromm, in that book, tries to disabuse ourselves, what I should say, tries to disabuse us of the idea that love just happens. Fromm contends that love is an art. It's an art in the same way that medicine and carpentry and teaching are arts. And since love is an art, it requires a certain knowledge, and that if we don't acquire this knowledge, as well as certain character traits, we're never going to be very good at loving. Professor Leo Buscaglia, in his book on love, put it this way. Buscaglia said, "Most of us never learn to love at all. We play at love, imitate lovers, treat love as a game." Another illusion, love is all around. Many songs have that line, or at least a line similar to that. Love is all around. Fromm and so many famous thinkers have said that's just not so, that love is rare. Indeed, Fromm, in his book, raises this question. He asks the reader to ask himself, how many truly loving human beings have you ever known? How many truly loving human beings have you ever known? Fromm contends that at least in Western societies, one of the things that militates against love is consumerism. That Europeans and Americans, among others, are taught that the good life consists of consuming. And Fromm contends that the principle of a consumerist society is antithetical to the principle of love. That consumerism is based on getting, love is based on giving. Another illusion. Love forever, hate never. Love forever, hate never. Sigmund Freud tried to disabuse people of this notion. Freud claimed that in virtually all sentiments of love there is ambivalence. Again, in virtually all sentiments of love there is ambivalence. Freud contended that virtually all sentiments of love contain elements of rage and hostility. Why so? Why should, or how can love contain elements of rage and hostility? Well, Freud and others claim that among the reasons that can be hatred in a loving relationship are the following. That sometimes people are angry that the spouse or lover has not ended one's loneliness, or even more significantly, that the spouse or other person in a love relationship has not gratified all of one's needs. Literature, the great literature, abounds with examples of this ambivalence in love. Thoreau said this, and I'm quoting him, "That which we love is so mixed and entangled with that we hate in one another." And Dostoevsky, the famous Russian novelist, on the subject of romantic love, in a superb novel called The Idiot, has a character say this, and I'm quoting from the book, "But I know he loves me so much that he can't help hating me." And Tolstoy, on a similar note, on romantic love, in War and Peace, has a character say this. First of all, let me set this up for you. In War and Peace, Prince Andrei is thinking of Natasha, and Prince Andrei says to himself, "I loved and hated none as I did her." And D.H. Lawrence, in Sons and Lovers, characterizes a relationship between Miriam and Paul in this way. Again, Miriam and Paul are lovers, romantic lovers. And deep down, Miriam hated Paul because she loved him and he dominated her. D.H. Lawrence and many other writers have also addressed themselves to the ambivalence in sibling love. And in a particular passage in Sons and Lovers, he addresses himself to the relationship of two brothers, Paul and Arthur. And D.H. Lawrence describes it this way. Paul, Arthur admired and loved and despised. And Paul admired and loved and despised slightly Arthur. I should have put that word slightly in there. Both brothers, according to D.H. Lawrence, again, loved each other, admired each other, but slightly despised each other. And of course, I've already addressed myself to the famous scene in Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, where Jamie tells his younger brother that while he wants him to succeed in life, it's quite likely he will try to put up barriers to his brother's success. Again, ambivalence in sibling love. Another illusion. Falling in love is real love. M. Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, addresses himself to this illusion. And Peck says this, and I'm quoting him: "Falling in love is not real love. Falling in love is not real love." He goes on to explain himself this way. He says that falling in love is always sexually motivated and usually has a selfish component. And that selfish component is to terminate one's loneliness. Peck claims that when people fall in love, usually they're not thinking about the other person, they're thinking about themselves. He says this, and again I'm quoting psychiatrist M. Scott Peck: "The experience of falling in love is invariably temporary. The honeymoon always ends. The bloom of romance always fades." And another illusion. Dependency is love. Dependency is love. Psychiatrist Peck also addresses himself to this idea. And he mentions that it's not unusual that patients will come to a psychiatrist threatening suicide, and that a patient will say, "I'm going to commit suicide because my husband or my wife has rejected me and is threatening to leave me. And I love my husband so much that I can't live without him, and consequently, I'm going to commit suicide." And Peck says he tells such people the following, and again I'm quoting him: "You are mistaken. You do not love your husband. What you describe is parasitism, not love. What you describe is parasitism, not love." Well, this raises the question, what is the proof of genuine love? How do you know? How do we know that we have a genuinely loving relationship? Well, the great thinkers say that such relationships have at least three components. First of all, in a genuinely loving relationship, each person must be more interested in the other person than he is or she is in himself or herself. And secondly, in a genuinely loving relationship, there is a commitment to ease and enrich the other person's life. Again, a commitment to ease and enrich the other person's life. And finally, in a very good relationship, there is an absence of exploitation and domination. Another illusion. One will never do evil things to be loved. Well, there are so many examples of this illusion and the idea that people will do evil things to be loved. Some obvious examples. One can imagine the number of people in the southern part of the United States who, whence racial segregation existed there, were very much against racial segregation. I'm talking about white people now. White people who were convinced that racial segregation was evil. But they hesitated to tell anybody this, especially white people, even members of their own family, because they thought that perhaps family members, other people, would love them less, respect them less, if they spoke out against segregation and declared it to be an evil. Another obvious example. I don't doubt that there were Germans, in fact I know there were Germans in Nazi Germany, who believed that anti-Semitism was evil. But again, so many of these Germans were very reluctant to speak out against anti-Semitism because they feared that other people might love them less. A final illusion. One must have romantic love to make life worthwhile. Again, one must have romantic love to make life worthwhile. It's interesting, if we watch television or go to the movies or listen to music, I think it's easy to get the impression that life without romantic love is a very bitter experience, that we must have romantic love. Well, the fact of the matter is that many famous people and many not so famous people have led very fulfilling lives without a focus on romantic love. Indeed, who have been some of the great lovers in history? Buddha, Jesus, Confucius, Saint Francis of Assisi, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, just to name a few. None of these people based their fulfillment on romantic love. The fact is, millions of people each day experience far more satisfaction in trying to serve mankind, in engaging in what we might call brotherly love, than in romantic love. And what are some examples of the ways in which people express their love of humankind? Well, trying to do one's job well, trying to serve other people on one's job, trying to alleviate suffering in the world, fighting injustice. It's been said that one cannot love people and not hate injustice. Again, one cannot love people and not hate injustice. And again, among others who are very good at loving mankind are people who approach other people with affection and warmth. Mother Teresa talked about the power of a smile and suggested if we want to make the place a warmer place in which to live, a more fulfilling place in which to live, one of the very simple things we can do more of each day is to smile at people and to show them affection. Of course, love of mankind doesn't exclude romantic love, and vice versa. Fromm, in his book, The Art of Loving, contends, however, that one cannot love one person without loving mankind. I'll say that again. Fromm contended that if one is to have a successful romantic loving relationship, one must love mankind, that you can't have one without the other. Let me rephrase that. You can't have romantic love without also having love of humankind. Why so? Well, Fromm believed that love is an attitude. Love is an attitude towards the entire world, not just one particular person. I think Confucius provides some illumination on this subject. Confucius said, the key to promoting love of humankind is parental love. Confucius believed that when parents love their children, they are in their own way promoting love of humankind, because a decent society depends on decent families. Again, a decent society depends on decent families. You will recall in my introduction to this series on love, I pointed out several possible definitions of love. And I made the point that my favorite definition comes from ethicist and Professor Joseph Fletcher, who said that love is justice. He said that to love is to be just. To be just is to be loved. And this reminds me of a prayer that a former Jewish student of mine gave me, and which I have filed and which I have used in many lessons and lectures. The prayers are called prayers for Yizkor. Again, my guess is the Jewish people watching are familiar with these prayers. Prayers for Yizkor. Well, how do they fit in to what I'm talking about now? Well, these prayers make us more aware of what we should avoid if we want to be good lovers. And let me read you a segment, again, of prayers for Yisker. And I'm quoting now. For all these sins, O God of forgiveness, forgive us and grant us atonement. And now the sins are listed. Poor workmanship and neglect of our duties, unfair business practices, and ruthless competition, keeping silent in the face of evil in high and low places, gossip, neglecting our parents, envy, not developing our capacities, and not allowing others to become what they could become. And also, conformity. Yes, according to this prayer, conformity can sometimes be a sin. Under certain conditions, conformity can be a sin. If, for example, you're conforming to the evil behavior of others. It's also interesting that the Bible addresses itself to this. In Romans 12, verse 2, it says, conform yourself no longer to the standards of this world. In summing up, I should point out that we should remember that at best we are all imperfect lovers, and that we can all get better at loving. Indeed, Albert Camus, famous French thinker, put it this way. He said, there is no love that cannot be better. And Plato tells us that the good lover, Plato tells us that the good lover realizes that one's pursuit of happiness cannot be fulfilling unless we help other people to promote their happiness. And finally, Henry David Thoreau reminds us that we're all artists. In Walden, Thoreau wrote, to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts.